opportunity to put some comments down on the right-hand side of those two platforms. Those comments will come back to us here at Interchange headquarters, and we will hopefully have some time towards the end of the show to answer some of your questions of our experts today. Make sure you subscribe as well. You can go to our interchange.com.au page and subscribe for the 2 p.m. project or any of the other offerings that we produce here at Interchange. Today on the 2 p.m. project, was this the reboot that we had to have? How can a virus that took probably fewer than about 100 days to shut down the world, how can the virus teach us something about a better way of being? Or is it likely that we are just going to return to a case of business as usual? Who knows? What we do next is going to be both fascinating and defining. So for the next 45 minutes, what we've learnt from the COVID-19 experience. On today's show, as I mentioned, we've got 3 fantastic guests who are going to bring unique perspectives to this topic. As always, on the 2 p.m. project, I'm joined by one of my Interchange colleagues. And today, it's Consulting Director Nick Everingham. Nick, hello. Pronto, Nick. Hello.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Good. I'm very well. Welcome. We'll chat to you in a sec, Nick. We also have the Chief Employee Experience Officer at MYOB. It's a warm welcome to Helen Lee. We also have Managing Director and Co-founder of reusable coffee cup manufacturer KeepCup. Please give a big warm welcome to Abigail Forsyth. Abigail, thank you so much for your time here today. I'm looking forward to the chat with you as well. Our musical guest today on the show is the marvellous Juliette Coleman. Juliette, hello. Welcome to the 2 p.m. project. We're going to have a chat with Juliette, and Juliette will play towards the end of the show in about 30 minutes' time. So stick around for the entire show. And as we dissect all the lessons learnt from the COVID-19 experience, you are watching the 2 p.m. project live from graffiti-ravaged downtown Fitzroy. But it is a beautiful place. Come visit here sometime. So let's go to my first guest, Interchange colleague, Consulting Director Nick Everingham. Nick, this has been a fascinating time where businesses have been forced to pivot, forced into finding ways to be far more flexible in the workplace, and we're hearing the phrase, the new normal, bandied about all over the place. Do you agree that we're going to be seeing a new normal sometime soon? And if so, what do you think that's going to look like?
Chris, I think it is fascinating. You certainly hit the nail on the head there. It's really been really interesting to see how humans can morph and change what they how they think and what they do, as well as seeing how businesses change. And we often hear that habits are formed after 21 days. There's some other research that says it's up to 66 days to change a habit. But regardless of those time frames and those time brackets, we've been in isolation for well over that longer period of 66 days. So by all research, habits have changed. And we've seen flexible working arrangements come into place, and that's been a great thing for many people. Some people, my son is just a graduate in an organisation, so he's not enjoying it. He's wanting to get that graduate experience. But for most of us, it's really interesting to see how we can work in that environment. And I know that there's also flow-on effects from flexible work and how that morphs or moves into other aspects of. People can people now live further away from CBDs where they're used to working and only go into the head office once a month or once a fortnight? And travel time. In Sydney, the average travel time last year is 71 minutes per day in Sydney, and 64 in Melbourne and Brisbane. So we're going to see that increase in time available for individuals who aren't going to be travelling as much. So from a workplace flexibility standpoint, those habits will form and probably have formed, and people are getting used to a new norm. How long they stick for will be an interesting study within itself, but I'd say that many people would like to see them stay.
And Nick, from an operational focus, like picking up on what you've been talking about, considering supply chain even, where do you think businesses might start to shift to find a new way of working?
Yeah, sure. So we've seen a lot of movement over the last 20 plus years, and with particular effort over the last 15 years of supply chains moving, having a large degree of reliability upon Asian markets for their inputs. Certainly, those who manufacture a lot have seen a lot of their manufacturing being done in China, and invariably that's because of cost, and the cost is largely driven by wages, etc. But I think that what we've seen, certainly with the with this incident, is people wanting to de-risk those supply chains, the risk to the supply of goods, and perhaps we're going to see a lot more onshoring of manufacturing of other inputs, etc. I know that the oil industry, for example, whilst the location of the oil is going to be static, but inputs such as pumps and pipes and all those sort of things they're certainly investigating, looking to move them to other markets, the manufacture of those goods, because they haven't been able to get those parts, etc. Just about all of the electrical componentry we have in Australia for housing manufacturing and for all of our building effort comes from China, and certainly in the probably the first 4 to 5 weeks of this incident, of this COVID-19 experience, they just stopped. So those sort of suppliers are going to have to look, if they want to de-risk their supply chains. We're going to see an interesting, whether they go to other Asian markets, Vietnam, etc., but just to diversify that sourcing and therefore reducing the risk. The other thing we're starting to see, and we've been seeing this over a few years, but this has really sped it up, is in the past a lot of organisations have offshored a lot of their capability and transactions and processing, etc. So call centres, etc., have been in the Philippines and India. And what happened when COVID started is some of the banks, for example, onshored a lot of that capability, and they've had people working from home, answering calls, etc. And what they found, because some of these organisations actually track the keystrokes of the people on the screens just to measure efficiency, etc., is they found that the people in Australia are just as, if not more, efficient than those people working in the overseas markets. So the biggest reason why people offshored was because of cost. The cost is certainly still there, that cost differential. It's coming a bit closer together now. But if you're going to take out the property costs because you've got people working from home, well, then that the margin becomes a lot narrower. So you're going to see a lot of organisations start to onshore a lot of these call centres and processing to people working from home, which I don't think that's a bad thing, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Nick, I'm going to move on to a question for you around leadership. I know you've been working with a lot of leaders during this time, and normally we like to look back for lessons learned, but I think I wanted to play this clip. For the lesson for governments and leaders was outlined pretty clearly by Dr. Michael Ryan in very early March. Now, Ryan is a surgeon and the executive director of the World Health Organization's Health Emergencies Program. He was talking about the virus in the press conference and emergency management, but in 30 seconds, he gave a pretty good lesson in how we need to be approaching this new world.
Be fast, have no regrets. You must be the first mover. The virus will always get you if you don't move quickly. If you need to be right before you move, you will never win. Perfection is the enemy of the good when it comes to emergency management. Speed trumps perfection. And the problem in society we have at the moment is everyone is afraid of making a mistake. Everyone is afraid of the consequence of error. But the greatest error is not to move. The greatest error is to be paralyzed by the fear of failure.
The greatest error is to be paralysed by the fear of failure. I love that. It's always been ringing in my head. That's been a lesson I learned very early on about moving quickly, and a real lesson, I think, for leaders. Unfortunately, I think the experience has favoured leaders who are honest about the uncertainty and honest about their limitations in a world where information is constantly changing. Unfortunately, we've seen some leaders take a slightly different approach.
You say, sir, what metrics you will use to make that decision?
The metrics right here.
If only it were that simple. Nick, let's go back to you, shall we? You've been working with senior leaders throughout the COVID-19 lockdown. What have you been hearing about the challenges that they have had and the changes they've made in their leadership approach?
Yeah, sure, Chris. What we've seen and what a lot of the leaders have expressed to me is that ability to communicate effectively with your people and also to make informed but quick, rapid decisions has been at the centre of this. And you can see this at the national level. We can see that very quickly when this crisis took hold is the Prime Minister formed a national cabinet, which was essentially a cut-down version of the federal cabinet, and it allowed for him to communicate directly with the premiers, with the key decision makers, to make quick, rapid and effective decisions and then effectively communicate those decisions with the people. But we're also seeing this in companies. We've seen companies, some of our clients have gone to a model where they haven't had to go through red tape. They've made quick, rapid decisions. They've also devolved authority to people who have a level of responsibility. And for example, one of the banks, there was a report in the paper the other day, but they've also informed us that the CEO has said, I'm not going to make decisions at this level. I'm going to pass that down to certain groups within the bank. So I spoke earlier about the onshoring. I mean, that wasn't made by the CEO of one of the banks. That was made by one of the divisions of the bank without even telling the CEO. And then they told him a bit later on down the track, good decision, quickly executed, and an effective decision that was made by employing a smaller group to make decisions and not relying and not having to go through the red tape that we normally see.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. That's Nick Everingham, who's our Consulting Director here at Interchange. I'm going to move on to Helen Lee. So Helen Lee is the Chief Employee Experience Officer at MYOB. Helen, thank you so much for joining us here today on the 2PM project. I'm really keen to hear your perspective from a people perspective here. People keep referring this to the new normal. Is it a new normal, do you think, or is it going to be business as usual when we return to the office from what we used to know as the office?
I think things will change. We have rebased, as Nick said, new habits will have been developed. I think the degree of shift is dependent on where an organisation was before a lot of this began. So, for example, for us, we're a tech business, a software development business, and we had high degrees of flexibility in the workforce already. To Nick's point, our contact centre was fully enabled to be able to work from home before this began, and that meant we were well positioned to take advantage and really just switch on at full scale the flexibility that we've been applying and preparing for quite some time. For some organisations, that was an easier transition than others, and therefore the resettling back will go to a different place for different organisations depending on where they started. But even for us, we've been, interviewing and surveying our employees along the way, pretty regular sets of questions that we've been sending out, and we know that, only 3% of them are actually desperate to get back to the office. They'll be there on day one. We've recently reopened our New Zealand and WA offices, and at a 50% target occupancy, we're seeing more like 10% of people coming back in those first weeks. So, people have developed new habits for themselves. They have a wariness around commuting, around, being in enclosed spaces together. And even when the rules change, those human fears or concerns or new habits will definitely mean that we're in a different place to where we were when it all began.
Helen, I know that flexible working has been a large part of the value proposition for MYOB employees for some time. You had a great deal in place before this crisis hit. I'm quite fascinated by the survey that you have been doing with your employees during this time. Have any of the responses to the questions that you've been putting out there been at odds to the direction of the senior leadership team or the organisation as a whole? And what do you do about that?
No, they haven't been at odds, and philosophically, we're quite comfortable with this. And we're an IP business. We're really about harnessing the capability of software developers, service people, sales people. It's really about the individual. We don't have widgets to sell and transport. So, building a value prop that works for individuals has been a big part of who we are. What has surprised me is perhaps the degree to which people are comfortable in this world. So, we've got 76% of people saying that they are really happy or very happy with the current arrangement, and over 80% of them intend to work from home 2 or more days in the future. So it's perhaps more a scale. There are a good number of them who are saying they may never come back. That's the bit I think that we'll struggle with more than anything. I think there will be a moment in time at which organisations will have to say that there is a need to come together. There are human points of connection. There is some work potentially that is better delivered face-to-face, or where, the gluing and the investment in relationships matters. The quantities of that, the timing of that will be different. We do see out of the US, particularly, we obviously spend a lot of time paying attention to what's happening in the Valley. A lot of those organisations have indicated work from home through to the end of the year. That's a long time for people to be disconnected physically from each other. In my view, probably a little too far. I think we just need to keep oiling relationships, but the pattern of contact will be very different going forwards.
You mentioned earlier that flexible working has been a part of MYOB for some time. My understanding is you have a flex charter, I think it's called. It's essentially a contract between the team members and the manager about how they will work. How did all your planning and that process in place, how did it stack up in this time of crisis?
Yeah, so we have something called a flex charter, and really what that is at the team level, a conversation that happens, and it's quite a live document, so they will adjust it as new team members arrive or a working requirement changes, but it's really their agreement. How often will they connect, what day or week will they all come into the office together, or which are the days that are out of bounds for early morning calls, or just those. How do we understand each other? How do we understand each other's worlds outside work as well? And what is the agreement that we make as a collective to be able to document that and agree that? So we've got a reference point to come back to, and it works for everybody in the team. So when we got into this situation, we were really able to move very quickly. And to be honest, the only thing that was on my mind when we were moving to full flex, into full lockdown, was just the capacity of the network to manage with all 2,100 of us simultaneously. And my team were heavily involved in the management and the routing of traffic around that and so on. And we tested that the week before. So we were able to switch it on at scale pretty quickly. And we've seen no productivity impact whatsoever. In fact, if anything, I think much higher productivity than people expected. So people have adjusted very well and very quickly.
I'm speaking with Helen Lee, who is the Chief Employee Experience Officer at MYOB. Helen, I'm interested to know the forced flexibility experience, which basically it has been on the rest of us who haven't had these sorts of processes put in place prior to the COVID-19 lockdown. The forced flexibility experience has been particularly challenging for many people due to the intensity, the lack of variation in their day. Some people have loved this experience. Where do you sit on that timeline, and what have you learnt about yourself?
I have not loved it personally. I feel quite capable of performing here. I'm, successfully going about my day. I think the social part of me is struggling with enforced isolation and perhaps more than anything, limited variety in a day. Just the change of scenery, the connection with people without those where you have forced video meeting contact, those ones, the bump factor in the kitchen, the sense of that wider community is something that I have missed. And I do feel that it is a very intense work experience. I feel that I walk to one room, I'm pretty much locked in there for the best part of 12 hours, and then I sort of leave at the end of a day. And so I found I've become much more protective of my weekend, whereas my boundaries around work and home used to be much more fluid. Now I feel I work in these moments and in this physical space, and I'm a little protective about allowing that to bleed into the rest of my personal life or even the rest of my home, whereas previously I would happily have worked in different parts of the house. So I probably sort of confined it in some ways, but I am missing just the variety and the engagement with different people.
Yeah. Fascinating. It's astounding what we learn through some of these times. Thank you so much, Helen. I'm going to come back to you in a second. We're going to move on to our third guest here today, Managing Director and Co-founder of reusable coffee cup manufacturer KeepCup, Abigail Forsyth. What a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time here today. Abigail, I'm very interested to hear your perspective on the experience of COVID-19. I just want to start though by throwing this one at you. So you're someone who obviously caught sight of an opportunity and ran with it with incredible results. Now, KeepCup, from my understanding, is now available in more than 65 countries around the world. What lessons can you offer business leaders coming out of the COVID-19 experience about identifying opportunities through all of these challenges?
Think of the future that you want to see in the world. Just think of what you want that to look like and take us there. And take us somewhere good, please.
So what was it like? I mean, did you have an idea and you know, run with it? I mean, I played that clip before of the guy saying, just, you know, if you wait for permission, you're going to lose. Mm-hmm. I don't imagine that's a phrase that many entrepreneurs have. Are you just naturally that way, or did you feel empowered in the moment to just believe in your idea and go for it?
Oh no, I mean, we'd circled that idea around for years. So we saw the problem in the cafes that we were running. We saw what the impediments might be. And, you know, one of the best pieces of advice I got was we took the tool in, which we thought was fantastic. And the tooling guy said, this is just a cup. It's just a plastic cup. How are you going to sell this thing? And he said, if you can't sell it, if you can't convince other people of the problem, forget about it. So it was that. It's realizing even though it's a product, it's not just a product, it's what it can do for you. It's what problems it solves. It's how it enhances your life. It's how it makes your coffee taste better. It's how it empowers you to feel you're part of solving the climate crisis. It's all those other intangibles. It's like the same with MYOB. You're not just, it's what it does for people. And it's the same with our product.
And so from your experience of trying to force that change, which I'm sure is what you had to do.
We didn't force it. We just showed them the light.
Is that right? Okay. This magical product that just does everything that you need. I reckon there was some forcing in there as well. How long did it take for those new habits to form in your clientele, in the people who were coming to your cafe? How long did it take for the habits to form, and what were the factors that helped embed the change?
I think it's understanding the problem. So, you know, for a long time, people didn't realise that disposable cups aren't recycled or recyclable. They're actually really thin plastic cups. And then once you realise that people use 1 billion of them every day and they're going into landfill, and that landfill's growing, and that, you know, in the last 14 years, there's 300 million kilos of plastic made every year that's just going into landfill, you go, I have to, you know, I've got no choice. I have to change my behaviour.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And then we make a beautiful product that's a delight to use, that comes in amazing colours and makes your experience of drinking coffee better than it was before. So it's those things, just a heady mix of those things.
Yeah, fantastic. I think of the KeepCup idea and the business as a business that's just heading in one direction. What are some of the lessons that you've learned? Were there some hard lessons that you've learned through this period? And have you found any new opportunities as a business as a result of COVID-19?
This has been a very difficult period for the business, and in some ways it's back to the beginning. So I guess the biggest lesson I've learned is while we've been worrying about how we message, you know, reuse is still important, big plastic and, you know, all the companies that sell us rubbish that they make our responsibility to dispose of, they've been going hard at it and opening up new opportunities, getting disposable bag bans lifted around the world. So I think that the lesson we've learned is we've got to be a lot more clear and targeted in our messaging, and be seeking not just a soft response, please, you know, use a reusable cup. It's like we want, you know, unnecessary and problematic single waste banned. Like the tap's got to be turned off. You know, from environmental point of view, COVID-19, it's like we're the frog in the hot water, and we've been lifted out of the hot water to see what the world might look like and what we're doing to the planet. And we're about to get back into the hot water. It's time to go, well, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do?
I'm speaking with Abigail Forsyth, who is the Managing Director and co-founder of reusable coffee cup manufacturer KeepCup. Abigail, along those lines, what's your hope from an environmental or a sustainability perspective coming out of this period? What do you hope the world has learnt and the changes that may take place as a result of this experience?
I hope that we focus on renewable. We divest of fossil fuels. We decarbonise the world. And we dematerialise. Like, you know, the fact is most people have enough clothes in their wardrobe to last them till they die. And we keep buying more and more stuff. So it's those things. And unfortunately, it's going to be a recession that drives a lot of that. But how can we make that a positive experience as well about what we value in life, what's important?
Thank you so much to all my guests here this morning. What time am I on? I'm on a different time zone. I'm just playing my own tune here at Interchange headquarters. Let's bring all our guests in. Nick Everingham, I always rely on my Interchange colleague here who's been sitting, listening, analysing. Nick, how about you throw a question first to Helen and then one to Abigail?
Yeah, so I'm interested to hear from you, Helen. You spoke about the practice of working from home and how that's going to obviously be a much more important part of organisations, particularly when you're cutting code or you're an IT development organisation. Organisations used to have people sitting in different time zones of the world, so they can hand projects on and on around the globe, 24/7 effect around the globe. So do you think that the practice of flexible working hours is just limited to working from home, or it's going to be people moving away from that 8:30 to 5:30 sort of working time frame to different hours of the day?
That's a good question. I think we are already finding, and well before COVID, there are certain parts of our organisation, and the guys cutting code are a good example of that, where they will be very flexible in when they bring their best thinking into play. And so they certainly wouldn't run on the standard 9 to 5 model in the way that they work anyway. So a brilliant piece of creativity may emerge at 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, etc. And, we certainly might not see them on the standard commuter rush hour when they come back in the next day, if they were coming in. But having said that, I think there are, even with work of that sort, there are moments where there are rituals in the way in which work is produced that require a level of synchronicity in how and when people are working. So there are times, for example, where code is co-developed, where they actually do partner and they QA each other's work through that process. There are stand-up rituals that require them to, come together to look at where they've got to. There is a certain set of, there's a certain pace, set of rituals, habits and patterns to how product is delivered, sprint cycles and so on. And so there still need to be those moments where teams or subsets of teams will coalesce around shared challenges to be able to come together. And we do have obviously a number of countries that are involved in different parts of our product, but in the main they tend to be operating within a time horizon that is within reach of each other, even if it's sort of handover moments at times of the day. We're not working with a global phenomenon in quite the same way. But to the principle of your question, rather than to our experience necessarily, I think that boundaries just vanish, in this model. And so, the thing we've learned more than anything is all the assumptions we held a few weeks ago have been proven to not be the case necessarily, or certainly be overcomable. So I think those habits, the set of assumptions we have about where work needs to be done has been challenged. So why does it need to go back to where it was before?
Yeah.
Thank you, Helen. Nick, how about a question for Abigail?
Yeah, Abigail, one of the, I guess, the recovery mechanisms that our government is looking at is bringing manufacturing, value-added manufacturing in particular, back to Australia. How do you think renewables and recycling, which quite frankly, from my understanding, we're incredibly poor at in this country, how can that play a part in that new manufacturing landscape?
Well, if you're going to circularise the economy, you have to have onshore manufacturing. So we manufacture all our plastic parts in Australia, always have. But, for industries like steel and glass, it's going to be pretty challenging because there's all the steel bottles in the world are made in one city in China. All the glass that we make can be made by 3 companies in the world in 3 locations. So the cost to bring stuff back on shore for certain materials, and particularly materials that are genuinely renewable, like plastic, is challenging because only 10% of all plastic ever produced has been recycled, and it can only be recycled 4 times. So the solutions there aren't great. So yeah, I think it's going to be bring manufacturing back is great in principle. How it works is going to be a challenge, and what do we actually need to have manufactured here as an economy? Like, there's a lot of stuff we just need to stop manufacturing altogether.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you mentioned that plastic can only be remanufactured 4 times, and I think cardboard is actually only 6 times because of the fibre breakdown, etc. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think we need to the government, business, and even the wider community need to deepen our understanding of recycling, because it's being held up as this solution, and it's a pretty limited solution in many respects.
Thank you to my 3 very special guests here today, Helen Lee, Abigail Forsyth and Nick Everingham. We're going to come back to you in a little minute. I'm going to move to our musical guest here. Juliette Coleman is a student at the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts in Perth, studying a Diploma of Music Theatre. Now, Juliette was a few weeks into term 1 of the course when COVID-19 hit. Stuck in Perth, the lockdown restrictions kicked in and the state borders began to close. With all her family in Victoria, Juliette made a swift trip home and has continued her studies online for the last couple of months. And I'm so happy to say we've managed to get Juliette onto the show the day before she returns back to Perth to continue on with her studies. Juliette Coleman, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me here.
Great. Juliette, many university students are saying that they are worried about the quality of the education that they are receiving as a result of the restrictions and potentially as a result of the high fees that they are paying. What are the challenges for someone studying musical theatre online, and what do you feel you may be missing out on?
Yeah, so I guess a huge part of musical theatre in general is that connection with the audience. We have entire classes devoted to performance practice and how we use the audience, and how communicating through song is literally the whole aim of musical theatre. Without that special element, you could just be singing a song or doing piano or whatever you want to do. It's all together that makes it musical theatre. So I had performance practice class yesterday, and it's a matter of, one, feigning that atmosphere, but also trying to not get so in your head, because you're in a room by yourself, and I'm sure you'd have experience with that. Things like filming self-tapes. You get very perfectionistic, and then assessment tasks that were meant to be filmed in one take back in the studio all of a sudden become some big in your head experience, and artists tend to kind of get in their heads a bit. So it is challenging in that respect. And of course, things like dance classes, so we'll have partnering, all those sorts of things. We're now mimicking it, so we have a move and we pretend someone's there, but of course it's not the real thing. So it's a new style of acting where we're learning about groups of people while being by ourselves. But I think that's the main one. There's a community atmosphere by being in a studio and by being on a stage that I think does get lost over Zoom.
Well, I don't know whether you saw a few weeks ago, I danced by myself here, Juliette. It wasn't pretty, so I have great sympathy for you. How about some of the lessons that you've learned? What are the positives? A positive, a couple of positives that you've taken out of this experience?
Yeah, I think I've definitely become way more disciplined than I could ever have been just by going to uni every day. Obviously, moving away from home was a big step. I think that being by yourself at 18, learning how much everything costs, where you're going to get yourself, all those sorts of things, those are all great, and those all make you a very disciplined human being. But in terms of my art and in terms of how I create art, those were things that I could do the morning of. No, I would never. But I think managing my schedule, managing my work, managing my expectations of what I want my work to look like, that's actually really positive. And I think I've also had to cut myself some slack. Drama school training as it is extremely difficult mentally, physically, emotionally, especially once all the COVID restrictions started coming in and all that sort of thing. It's hard when you are literally on the other side of the country. But at the end of the day, it's trained me up in so many other ways that I would have never gotten in a studio and that sort of thing. So that's a big positive.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Juliette Coleman, I'm so pleased that we've managed to get you onto the show before you head back to Perth tomorrow. Do you want to tell us about the song you've chosen for today, and then you can launch into it?
Yeah, sure. So the song I've written is called All I Need, and it was basically set on the backdrop of, once I found out that my application to go back had been approved, I, like most people during COVID, I have had to reevaluate what I care about, and little minuscule things all of a sudden seemed really big, or I became such a emotional person and all that sort of thing, and yet also feel like we're all experiencing this whole kind of this group sort of almost mourning. I felt like the first kind of isolation bit. I was going through the 5 stages of grief almost. I was angry, and then I was upset and all that sort of thing. And so now that I'm heading back, I'm looking back on the whole experience and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that's what this song is.
Fantastic.
That's all I need. That's all I need. That's all I need.
Absolutely beautiful, Juliette. Thank you so much. What a delight. I wish you all the best, Juliette, with your studies. I can't wait to follow your career and hear how you go. That's Juliette Coleman, who is a student at WAAPA, the Academy of Performing Arts in Perth in the musical theatre course. Thanks so much for joining us here today. I'm going to just come back to our special guests. It's been a fabulous episode of the 2PM project. I'm quite keen to hear from the special guests here today. Nick, I might start with you. What's one positive? I asked this of Juliette. I'm keen to hear from each of you. What's a positive that's come out of the COVID-19 experience for you?
Oh, look, personally and selfishly, it's just getting another hour and a half in my day because of lack of commuting. But I think on the broader scale is, one of the things I love doing is I love problem solving. And I think that this crisis has given, given our world a kick up the backside and a catalyst for change and for doing something positive. And I think that I'm really, the positive I'm going to see coming out this is seeing a lot of positive changes that both Helen and Abigail spoke about as well, that's going to come out of this. I think there's going to be a lot of positive changes.
Helen Lee, what about you? What's one positive which has come out of the COVID-19 experience for you?
The thing that I really love is all the things that we thought weren't possible. Somehow we've managed to make happen. Just the paradigms of presenteeism, of the hours of work, of the structures of work are just, we've been left with no choice but to think of ways to do that differently. And I just hope, and I'm really positive to believe that we will be perhaps a little less rigid in our holding of our other perspectives and our other opinions about what can and what can't be done, and instead be thinking about how we could do things differently rather than the reasons we can't. And I think this has been a wonderful moment to help challenge other parts of our lives and other parts of our ways of living.
Fantastic, thank you. Abigail Forsyth, how about you? Oh, there's the mute. It's the first time I've said mute today. It's just that mute button. It's all right. You've won the grand prize. How about you, Abigail? What's one positive?
The prize. I think for me, and anyone with children, it's an increased respect for the teachers and the amazing work they do and how patient they are. And so I hope it gives new respect in all sorts of ways to the teaching profession.
Here. Well, thank you so much to all my special guests here today. An episode connected to process, people and environment. Who no one doubted it could be done. Of course it could be done. Thank you to Helen Lee. Helen is the Chief Employee Experience Officer at MYOB. Helen, thank you so much for giving us your time here on Friday afternoon. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. And Managing Director and Co-Founder of Reusable Coffee Cup, manufacturer, KeepCup, Abigail Forsyth. Thank you also for your time here today. It's been such an interesting discussion. Thank you, Nick. Nick Everingham, my Interchange colleague. And finally, my great thanks to the show's producer, Double Leopard, Emma Grace. Emma, we've got to have a wave from you today. Hello, single leopard here today. Just the one leopard top on, which is the standard that we have here at the 2PM project. And to make sure you don't miss an episode, you can go to our YouTube channel. It will be available beyond this stream here today, also to our Facebook page. And go to interchange.com.au to subscribe to a whole range of other things that we produce here at Interchange. So Chris Gabbardi is my name. Thank you so much for your company here today. I'm looking forward to seeing you for our final episode next week in this 10-part series of the 2PM project. Meanwhile, stay safe, everyone. Catch you next week.
Thanks, Chris.